Hi everyone, I wanted to make a video for all of the requests that I've got to how to make sourdough bread, or how do I make my sourdough bread. I make mine the same every time because I'm a creature of habit, and I was really freaked out by all the recipes that I was finding on the internet that really made it seem like that sourdough bread making and using your own starter was a science experiment. And I want to just share the really simple way to do it. And then, like, I literally do it the same way every time. And eventually maybe I'll do it different, and you can too. But this is a good way to practice a simple way. I don't use the scale or measurements. I'm sorry. I use measurements. I don't use the scale or like tearing and weighing and all that stuff. So I have 5 simple ingredients that I use every time. I use my starter that's active, is fed that day and is active. It's ready. It's bubbly. And I'm going to share like how you can do a simple test to see if it's ready. So I use starter, flour, distilled water, room temperature, and salt, and also olive oil. Those are the 5 ingredients I use. I also add in sometimes in the last stage, in the folding stage, when you're getting ready to prepare it, you can add in fresh herbs or probably anything. Just play around with it. I like to add rosemary, so that's when I'll add that in. So that's the 6th ingredient. I start out with, so the measuring sizes for everything is 4 cups of flour, a little over a cup of water. Next is the starter, a half a cup of active starter, a teaspoon and a half of salt, and 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And then, yeah, go to town on whatever herbs you want to add. So I hope you enjoy the video and let me know how your bread turned out. Okay, so I explained the little things at the beginning, but just to go over it again in case somebody wants to skip to this part. 4 cups of flour. I did 2 cups of all-purpose, a cup and a half of bread flour, 1/4 a cup of rye, and 1/4 a cup of wheat, because I don't like more than a half a cup of wheat flour in my bread personally. I do have a cup of water right here, and I'm gonna do my liquids separate. So here, I'm gonna switch these around. You can kind of see. So I'm gonna do 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And then my starter is, as you can see, I marked it. I don't normally mark it, but I did for the video because some people do. You can see there's kind of bubbles down here, and it didn't double, but I think it's ready. It's ready enough for me. I don't know if you can see in there. So I kept mine in the fridge. I took it out this morning and I fed it a half a cup, and I left it out all day. So if you can see, it's pretty bubbly and airy, and that's what you want. But the real test will be right now is if it floats, which it is, which there's also oil in there, but in this part right here, there's not oil. So that means it's ready. There's a lot of air in there, which is good. So again, you don't need this fancy dough whisk, but my friend bought it for me, so I use it, and it's nice. So I mix this together first. Just, again, it's the water, oil, and activated starter. And then I'm gonna pour it in the flour. And this is where this whisk is really fun. So most people don't, or I don't know about most people, but a lot of sourdough recipes don't call for oil, and the dough will be super sticky. But I just found, you know what? I don't want to work with really sticky dough. I like consistency, and I like to not think about things and just do it the same every time. And so until I feel like I have more time that I want to really branch out with bread, then I'm just gonna keep doing it the way that's simple, and I don't have to think about it much, and it's really fun. Okay, so once it gets to right here, again, if you don't have this, it doesn't matter. Once you mix it as much as you can, then you're gonna use your hands. And this is the fun part, using your hands. Okay, so then you're just gonna, so this is pretty sticky, which I tend to notice that when the starter is really good, it's a little bit more stickier. And so this is the part that I will also be able to tell that when I add the salt after, in the next, what would I call it, like next stage or something, I would also add just a little bit of water when I'm mixing the salt. But this is really good. I'm not gonna need salt or water when I mix the salt in the next step. So I'm just kind of squishing it where it's kind of stays all together. I'm not trying to form it too much. I'm not worried about anything other than just getting everything to kind of, because see, like you're gonna have little pieces like this. I tried to add them, but when it stops grabbing, then I know that that's it. It's as much flour that this guy's gonna take. And I will move him to a bowl. And so, yeah, he didn't want to take any of this. Sometimes I'll add him back on here, like, you're going to eat him later when I add the salt. And then sometimes I just throw it away because it's like, whatever. It's just like little tiny pieces. All right, so then this is the part that I'm gonna let this sit. I'm also gonna take two things. I found these things on Amazon, but I haven't found them where they just sell the bigger sizes. Because I really like these to cover. And so I've had to buy like little kits. I've had to buy little kits, and they usually don't come with enough. But okay, so on this part, I'm gonna let this sit. I'm gonna get a piece of paper towel, and I'm gonna wet it. And I'm gonna kind of wring it out. I put it in here so it kind of pulls a little bit of that moisture, especially if your bread's really, like this is pretty moist, so it really doesn't need it. But especially when it's kind of dry. So then I'm gonna cover it, and I'm gonna leave it. So if it was like summer outside, I would always, my process is I would always go put it on the porch, because especially in Texas, the hot humidity like helps the bread so much. So you're gonna let it sit for 30 minutes to an hour. Okay, so I came back after about 2 hours, and I have just now taken this off. As you can see, this is basically the only dry pieces left. So this one, as I said, it was pretty moist. So like right there is pretty sticky. And this is the part that I try to shove back on there. So I'm gonna take this out, throw it away. I leave it in the bowl, and I'm gonna start kind of making a little pocket. This is where you're gonna need the salt. I use Himalayan salt just because I like it. Half. And my teaspoon is in my matcha jar, so I'm just gonna use the half. So I'm gonna sprinkle it around, fold it, sprinkle it. So it's gonna be 3 of these for me. And so here's where, if it's too dry, if it's not really kind of folding into itself, this is where I would take, and you don't need a lot of water. This is where I would take just a little bit and sprinkle it. Like I'll do it a little bit just so you can see. just like that. Well, this one doesn't need a lot of water. So I would do that to just kind of wetten it a little bit, so it'll take the salt and it'll kind of work with me on folding. I'm not really like so much worried about folding it correctly or right. It's just, I'm just trying to get the salt in there. So I'm just kind of mashing it and folding it over. So I'm gonna fold it again since there's a little salt right there. And so again, if it needs a little bit more water, just add a little bit. A little bit goes a long way, so don't add a lot. Just kind of sprinkle it. So see, that's about as much salt as I could get on there and still have a little bit left. So I'm gonna fold it again. So I can get the last little bit of salt. So now I have all my ingredients that I was gonna add into the bread. And I love to add, so I'll take it out and just kind of work it more into, so how you can work it into a ball, which was, that's what I'm doing, is you can take the ends and kind of push it into itself and push it. I guess kind of pull it to the end and push. And so like that piece right there. Just so it's kind of worked into itself and those hard pieces are kind of squished in there. Just a little bit. It doesn't need to be worked a lot because we'll work with it one more time. So I'm going to put this back in the same bowl, just like that, a rough ball. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be worked with a lot. This is not the time to start folding it and all that. So it's going to put the lid on, no napkin, has the salt, all the ingredients are in there, and I'm going to put the lid on again. So this process, it just depends. It's better to let it rise a little bit. You'll see it. I like using these glass bowls because I can kind of see it. And this is kind of the size that I use. I don't really know what size this is. 2.3 quarts. That's what it says. But I just found that this is good to work with. But this is not my finishing bowl. I have a proofing bowl. So these are just for in between. And so we'll let this sit for a couple hours would be nice. An hour minimum. And then we'll do the finishing, add herbs on the next one, and fold, prep, and then proof. So a point I forgot to add with transferring it to this nice proofing bowl, if you don't have one of those, and if you don't even have a glass bowl like this, just something with a lid. Like I even have this plastic salad bowl with a lid. Just something with the lid. You can let it proof in this same bowl. I would wash it and get some of the hard pieces off and then dry it out. And then again, put a lid over it. Or a cloth with a book. Works the same. All right, this is the final stage of proofing, where we're going to fold this and fold ingredients into it. As you can see, it rose a little bit, if you can tell, but honestly it could rise a little bit more. I am just impatient, and so there it is, just barely started rising. So I'm just going to take it completely out. You can use a dough scraper. I don't really use that because, again, I use oil, so it's not that sticky. I have prepared, I'm going to put rosemary in here as I'm folding it, and I have prepared this. You just want to dust it with flour. I just use all-purpose flour, and I have a couple rosemaries because this is going to be the top. Whenever you put it in here, what's on the bottom is actually the top, going to be the top of your bread. So those two pieces will be on the top of my bread. And I have a couple fresh rosemary, and so I'm going to flatten it out at first, and then I'm going to start putting some of the rosemary in here as well. then you're gonna kind of stretch it and fold it back into itself. Then I give it a little turn, flatten it out a little more again, and more rosemary. So again, if I would have left it a little longer, it would have been a lot more, it would have wanted to really stretch and fold a lot more, but I didn't. So that's as much as it's gonna let me work with it, or I'm going to work with it, because I'm gonna start tearing it, and you don't want the dough to start separating. And so again, I folded it into itself, just kind of like that, like this, into the bottom, and see it's starting to separate a little bit, but that's okay. You just don't want to work with it too much that it starts splitting. And then I put it in here, and I'll kind of, what I'm doing more is not just like pushing it, but I'm kind of evening it out, like, because it's gonna rise, so I don't want it to rise up in the middle. I want it to also grab on the sides. So I'm just gonna spread it out a little bit, just a little. Then I'm gonna take this came with this basket. You can get it on Amazon. This is just a cloth. I'm gonna wet this. This is what I do. Because I found, because this is not airtight, so letting it proof outside overnight, for me, I found that my dough can kind of get a little hard. So I wet the cloth and put it around on the outside. And if it's the summertime, and like I was saying that I put it outside, then I take extra measures, and I might put a wet cloth, how I did in the very beginning, underneath, inside here, between this and the wood thing, just so it doesn't dry out. And then I'll use this, reuse this again to put on top. It's a little bit harder to stretch. Just tuck those sides under. Yep, see it, just a little bit. All right, and then I just leave it, and I will check on it in the morning. All right, it's the morning time. It's about like almost 9, and I finished about almost 9, so it's been about 12 hours. And as you can see, it hasn't fully risen yet. So it could either have been because I didn't on the last process, I didn't let it rise a little bit before taking it out and folding it and adding the rosemary, because that kickstarts the yeast and activating it when it starts rising, and then when you take it out and you start folding it, that adds that second like kick, and I didn't do that. So I can either let it sit here for a little bit more. I could cook it as is, and it's not going to get as big. I can let it sit for a little more, just time, or I can like put a warming oven on and then turn it off, because you don't want it to start cooking. So I am going to let it just sit here for a little bit, and then we'll come back and look at it. Okay, so I ended up putting it in the oven. I put it on as low as my conventional oven would go, which was 200. I let it get up to that, and then I shut it off. And I re-wet that little material cover on the outside because it was dry. That also could have been why. It could have been too cold. and adding the wet thing on the outside could have caused it to be a little bit more cold. So it's gonna be the rising process a little bit slower if it's cold. So I have it in there for now and check back. All right, this is as much as I'm gonna wait on it, and probably as good as it's gonna get. I put it in the oven. As you can see, some of it started drying out. You don't really want that. That's why it's better to wait. But I was a little impatient. So I take a piece of parchment paper and I'm gonna flip it over. And then I have my fingers still under one side and I'm just making sure it kind of detaches, and I feel it let go. So there we go. I also just take my fingers and kind of tuck it back under carefully, just because it wants to flatten out a little bit. So I'm just kind of making it a little bit taller. I went ahead and preheat the oven. You're gonna cook it at 400, but I preheat it at 450. And we'll talk about the pans here in a minute. Of course, it's better if you have cast iron. Use whatever you have. Whatever you can is oven safe, and maybe like a skillet, something you cook with. You want something that has a little bit of depth to it, and that can hold the circumference. And if it's bigger, that's fine. If you don't have anything with a lid, what we do is you create moisture, and you want to take like a brownie pan or something, and with 1/8 of water, and that's already in there for mine, and I'm going to cook it in a little cast iron skillet that's about 10-inch, and it has a little bit of depth to it. And I don't have a lid, so I put the brownie dish already in there. You want to put it when you preheat the oven at 450. When it's ready, we're going to bump it down to 400. But there we have it. This is ready. The oven's preheated. I bumped it down to 400, and I'm going to take the pot out of the oven. So you preheat the pot in the oven so it's nice and hot. We're going to just transfer the bread in the parchment paper. If you don't have parchment paper, you can just use flour and oil, the combination, or one or the other. So once you set it on the pan, it's going to be set. So that's why I go ahead and tuck the bread under so it's nice and round, because once you set this on there, it's set. It starts forming. So there we go. This is where you're going to score the bread. So you take a little razor blade, and I'm just going to make a simple X across. So you kind of go in there a little bit deep. I'm going to go all the way here, and then same thing across. And I kind of go back through again, just so it can kind of really lay open. All right, now it's ready for the oven. We've got the bread, and we're gonna put it in the oven. As you can see, I have the brownie dish in there, and it's already been in there since preheating, and it has water still in there. So there we go. And then you set the oven timer or your phone timer for 20 minutes. The timer went off for 20 minutes, so you're just gonna take the water out and cook it for another 40 minutes. And this is what the bread looks like. A little side note is, if all else fails, I just tell my bread in the same way that Christ raised from the dead. I command you, rise in the name of Jesus. All right, it's been 40 minutes and it's done. So now you just let it rest for an hour at least on a cooling rack or something that it can breathe underneath. Done.